A few years back, when I was 17, I went to a party. And everything was alright until the host started getting really intense and creepy. By that point, it was around 3 a.m. and I was pretty drunk. I decided to call an Uber in order to avoid any advances from the insistent guy. The Uber shows up and I try to sober up when I get in. The driver starts to make small talk with me, and in the state that I was in, I failed to see any of the red flags. He started to ask me about the party that I was at, and I told him about the creep. And then he told me that it was because I was short and cute. He then asked my age, and sensing a weird vibe from him, I told him that I was a minor. I thought that would deter any further advances, but it turns out that was a horrible idea. He was driving pretty recklessly on the highway, and I snapped out of my drunken stupor really fast. He then asked for me to go get drinks with him that same night, and told me that he really liked me. I quickly told him that I would get grounded if I stayed out any later, and that my mother was awakened waiting for me to come home. Keep in mind, I lived in Mexico, and the amount of people, and especially women, that get taken advantage of daily is ridiculously high. When we got to my home address, I noticed that the doors were locked, and he kept on insisting for us to go get a drink, even though by now it was almost 4 a.m. I tried to act as nice as possible when I told him that I couldn't that night, and he then asked for my phone number and told me that we could go out the next day. So, not being the first time that some creep had asked me for my number, I gave him my number but changed the last digit, so he couldn't actually contact me. But then he actually dialed the phone as I was getting out of the car. Of course, my phone didn't ring and he started getting agitated, and I said that I had given him the wrong number. I played drunk and stupid and recited my number again, but I actually said it correctly in order for him to think that he heard the last number wrong. He chuckled and said that it was his bad, and told me that we would see each other the next day. I made my way into my house and immediately woke up my mom because I was terrified. She managed to calm me down and told me to go to sleep, so I went into my bedroom and started putting on my pajamas when I heard my phone ringing. The Uber driver was trying to video call me, and I lost my mind when I saw that on my screen. I immediately denied the call and then noticed that he had sent me about 15 messages asking what time he could come to pick me up, and why I wasn't replying. I mean, of course, I blocked him right away, and thought that would be the end of it. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number and checked the picture and saw that it was the driver. He asked me why I had blocked him and started spamming me again, so I immediately blocked him. Over the course of the next month, I'd got messages from random phone numbers, and it quickly became obvious that it was the driver. I would always block him, but eventually, I had reported him on the Uber app and changed my number. The only problem is, he knows where I live. I was working at my first ever job in retail, and I was around 20 years old. It was a busy morning around 9 a.m., somewhere mid-December, hence why it was so busy. I was working the checkouts as per usual, scanning items, ringing up customers and all that jazz. About an hour into my shift, I was serving an elderly man who bought just a handful of items. After giving him his subtotal, another guy behind him, smelling of booze, stretched out, handing me some cash. I kindly told him that I wasn't serving him, that I was serving the man in front of him. And then I looked down and saw that he was buying some cheap knockoff branded Baileys, some booze, and of course, I figured out that this guy is wasted. Just as I was taking payment from the elderly man, I was planning in my head how I was going to tell the next guy that I can't sell alcohol to him if he's already drunk, as this was my first job and I had never encountered this sort of thing before. So I finished serving. Now on to the drunk guy. I looked around in hopes to find another colleague or my manager, but there was no one in sight or available to help. So I looked at the man, and just before I opened my mouth, I felt someone grab a fistful of my hair, and there was something sharp poking me in the back. And of course, a man whispered in my ear, to which I also smelled alcohol on his breath. "Serve my mate." He pushes, which I'm assuming was a knife, harder into my back. "Now." In complete shock, I said nothing. I just scanned the bottle, took the cash, and they were gone. I quickly turned around to my colleague working checkouts behind me, but all they did was look at me and asked if I was okay, completely unaware of what had just happened. Then I went for my break. I see my manager pass by, so I rush over to him and told him what had just happened. All he did was laugh because he thought that I was joking. He criticized me for selling alcohol to someone who was already under the influence. Whatever that sharp object that was in my back had cut me. Before my break, I could feel blood running down my back and it was sore. Of course, I couldn't see blood as my uniform is black though. I screamed, "It's true, it did happen." I turned around and lifted my hair, and I have very long hair. I lift up my shirt or get my female colleague close by to do it. This guy freaking sliced me. But the manager said, "Mew, no, I don't want to see you lift up your shirt." And he just walked away staring at his phone. Well, I did not return to finish my shift. I snuck out of the store, took a taxi, and I went home. My mom cleaned up my back and dressed it, and then the next morning, she called work to tell them that I would not be returning, as the manager's incompetence to take action when I could have almost been stabbed over a bottle. For context, I'm a 24-year-old female and I live in a very populated city where people drive a lot. I'm still shooken up by this and I'm honestly curious to hear your thoughts. The other night, I had parked my car outside and went to let my dog into the house, and I went back out to get my stuff. Note, it was about 6 p.m. and completely dark out because of the winter. I get into my driver's seat, lock the car, and I'm sitting there for about a minute getting my stuff together. All of a sudden, I see a man walk in front of my car to the driver's side window. He's holding something up to my window, and I automatically get extremely panicked. A few months ago, a man held a wrench up to my window in a grocery store parking lot, where I was sitting with my roommate and I, but he saw my dog and he walked away fast. It was a sketchy situation then, and a sketchy situation now. Now the next few steps are blurry. I am looking at him in a panic. He is motioning for me to roll my windows down. I look into the back of my car to see my dog there to protect me, and I realize that she isn't there, as I just let her into the house. I do realize that I had the back windows both about 75% open, a rookie mistake. And then a thought pops into my mind. I can drive away. My car is still on. I shift the car into drive. He reaches back onto either the window or the door, or the side of the car, I don't know. I start to drive and he backs up. I pull out into the street and almost hit another car, and I ended up pulling out and leaving, shaking. The next day, I realized my landlord had a camera pointed at the front of the house to see if there were any packages getting stolen. I asked if he had clips from that time the night before, and he did. Too bad that it's motion censored, so it only shows the moment when my car is pulling out. He walks away from the car and he has a huge wooden plank or something in his hands hidden behind his back. At least a 3-foot plank or something. He then walked down one of these streets a little bit, and then turned around and went another way. I wish I didn't even see that video because I was scared before and I thought maybe that I was overreacting. But now I know that he was holding something there that could have potentially been a weapon. I'm very thankful that I trusted my instincts. Someone on a neighborhood website that night said that their car had gotten stolen 2 streets over, so maybe he had wanted my car. I was 23 when I started working full-time at everyone's favorite supermarket. I had struggled over 3 years of college before deciding to get a full-time job, and had worked a trial full-time job for 6 months before becoming a greeter a year before it was changed to something more serious. I look younger than I am, and people have asked me if I was still in high school or if I had a boyfriend, and I was ignorant enough to be used to those questions under a work environment. I also have anxiety, so I was worried about customer service more than my own comfort zone most of the time in that position. I soon started to keep work journals detailing what I saw on a daily basis, or anything that I found suspicious, which came in handy for me in my opinion. There was this older gentleman that needed to use an electric cart to get around the EFS that I helped from time to time, since I normally watched the secondary doors. He introduced himself as Al, claimed to be in his 70s and required the electric cart because of all the smoking he did since his younger years. Al normally would strike up long conversations about his life. After that he was done shopping, that he would stay at least another 5 or so minutes before leaving, including asking if I had a boyfriend and at one time, making up scenarios of meeting a potential boyfriend. As stated before, I was used to hearing the boyfriend question, so much that I stick with saying, I don't have a boyfriend and I'm not looking to find one anytime soon. Al took this as me lying to get out of the situation when I was telling the truth. I also overlooked a lot of what he had said most of the time, because it was normally loud when these conversations had happened. He had a rasp to his voice, which was a proof of the smoking information he had told me, and I thought they were things that were the norm from his time. As a retail worker, I felt it would have been rude if I ignored him, and it gave Al a reason to think that I was his friend. I didn't start seeing red flags about his behavior until late November 2018, when he told me that I looked pretty, and that he wouldn't imagine me naked. It made me uncomfortable, but I awkwardly thanked him for the compliment, and he went about his shopping before I documented it down. Red flag number 2 came a month later, the day after Christmas and sometime after my birthday. Earlier that day, I was talking to fellow greeter Tom, a male in his mid-50s, about when greeter Queenie would let us go on our breaks after a Mountain Dew spill, when Al came in to do his shopping, and after he was done, I was helping him transfer groceries to a pushcart. He said that he saw me talking to Tom in a monotone-sounding voice, and left without going into a conversation. It was enough to scare me. Red flag number 3 came not even a week into the new year. Al had come back to do some more shopping and tried to strike up a conversation with me after he was done, but noticed how I was trying to focus on my job more than him. This prompted him to ask if he made me uncomfortable, and I told Al that I didn't want to be rude, as I thought telling him would make him upset at the time. Al told me that he sees me as a friend, and that whenever he comes in, he looks to see if I'm working because I'm the friendliest greeter compared to everyone else before he left. I could tell that he wanted to put me at ease, but it had done the opposite, as I found I was right to be paranoid about him. I started to actively avoid Al if I ever saw him again, and was alone at either door, acting like I was busy and having an assistant manager switch me and Queenie to different doors whenever the two of us worked alone in the morning. It had worked for a month until greeter Nora came and gave Queenie her breaks when she wanted them. Come February, I'm gathering baskets when I spot Al at the register that sells tobacco, and he says hi to me, but I ignored him and I hurried away. I later asked one of my managers to use the restroom and hid in there until I couldn't hear him. Self-checkout host Dory had noticed how uncomfortable I was, as Al recounted that he thought he might have insulted me because he had asked if I had a boyfriend. He then told her everyone he was saying to me, and Dory understood why I was so uncomfortable. She later told me that Al was very vocal about me ignoring him until he left. I told 2 other coworkers as I was trying to catch up in my journaling, as I had fallen behind in it, and they told me to escalate the situation to the head of loss prevention, Rebecca. I eventually did once. I had 3 written entries down and marked as my evidence, and told Rebecca what I had been doing to avoid Al. I was afraid to tell anyone in management without any evidence, as I was worried I would be brushed off as an anxious worker. But Rebecca took me seriously and said that I was doing the right thing to avoid him. Since my journaling included times and dates, I was able to give Rebecca the time frame that Al was most commonly coming into the shop at the time, sometime between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., closer to the end of the month, and mainly on Sundays. With that in mind, I was told to keep an eye out whenever Al ever came back in, and to point him out to her or her team, as his actions could lead to sexual harassment of the customers as well. In March, I was surprised to see Al come in at a later time and act more professional around me, keeping things to hello and goodbye instead of trying to make conversation. Even with the change of attitude, I still kept my guard up. Near the end of the month, around 6:50 at night, Al stated how nice the weather was and asked me if I could help him out of his car with his groceries, so I could take the electric cart back inside. It's EFS's policy that the electric carts stay inside to avoid any damage, unless if the customer physically can't get to the store without heavy assistance. So I politely said that he had to use a push cart, as the electric cart can't go outside, and that I would get him one. Al was a bit insistent in taking the electric cart out, and was halfway through the entryway, but I had pushed the push cart close to the electric cart, and politely insisted that the electric cart stay inside to avoid getting damaged from the pebbles and dust that could get into it. Al relented at that reason, had his groceries put into the push cart and left. I was relieved that the situation wasn't escalated, so I had to help him, but I did take note of his car should Al get an idea to try and follow me home. That was also the only time he had ever asked for me to help him outside. I eventually told Nora that I didn't feel comfortable around Al, and she said that I wasn't the only young woman who had said these things too, as he said things like this to other female workers at other EFSs since Nora had transferred over from the west location in the city. A little over halfway into April, I switched over to cashiering and put together more information about Al's visits, so I could try to avoid serving him by myself. Coming in at around the time food stamps were replenished, and within these 7 to 10 days at the end of the month, mainly on Sundays and Fridays, and during the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. time frames. Lucky enough, I didn't see Al after the switch. Even more coincidentally, at the start of May, I found an online article by the local newspaper with a picture of who looked like to be Al in my Twitter timeline. I didn't want to get my assumptions up and had Nora look at the picture 2 days later. To my shock, Nora confirmed that it was Al. Reading the article revealed that Al had spilled gravy on his laptop and took it into Popular Electronics to get the files recovered, when the IT people found what appeared to be inappropriate images during the recovery, and they had called the police. Al had admitted to saving the photos and was able to describe what he saved and was arrested. The article also revealed that Al wasn't his real name, that he was really in his mid-50s, and was from a nearby city in Iowa, which explained why he mainly came in on the weekends. I told everyone that knew this story that they were equally shocked, but also relieved. I did research on his state laws on the charges against Al a few days after his scheduled court appearances, and found that he was guaranteed at least 2 to 10 years in prison at the least, and immediate registration as a sex offender. In October, I decided to do more research as it had been months, and I found more articles confirming that Al had copped a plea deal for 2 years, and over $600 in fines for each count against him, and he was sentenced in September. I had switched to another position on the sales floor by the time that I found out about the sentencing. It's been over 2 years since then, and I have my own coworkers and Rebecca to thank for giving me the fact and confidence that I do have the option to tell a customer no if I feel something isn't right. But I can't help but think about how badly things could have gotten if I would have helped him out to his car and if he had other intentions in mind. It also should be noted that any electric cart policies are put in place not only to maintain the functionality of the cart, but also to protect the employees from injury or other harm at any store electric carts are provided, and I was lucky to enforce this policy when I did.